and welcome to another edition of our e-learning segment. We are thankful to God for giving us another day and also making it possible for us to meet once again as a class. Today we continue with our lesson on young people and the individual, and then on our subheading, the adolescents. We have looked at adolescents, its definition, some of the myths that is associated with them, and then the rest. And then you can agree with me, or you can recall that in our previous lesson we discussed the physical, emotional and psychological changes that take place in boys and girls during adolescence. We also learned that there are certain myths that are associated with adolescents and also tend to affect their behavior. Today, and for that matter, we'll be looking at some of the problems that is associated with the adolescents. Problems associated with adolescents. And by introduction, we say during adolescence, peer groups and other external appearances tend to increase in importance. Sometimes they may experiment with drugs and alcohol or sexuality. Boys and girls, when they reach adolescence, may tend to experiment the use of drugs, or they may experiment with drugs, alcohol, or even sexuality, or may even come under pressure from peers to indulge in any of these acts. That's the alcoholism, the drug use and abuse, and then also sexual activities. These things lead to many problems which directly affect the individual. These problems that we are talking about tend to directly affect the individual, and when I say individual, I'm referring to the adolescent. So it tends to affect the individual and eventually the family, the community, and then the nation at large. So one cannot boldly say that if he or she indulges in drugs, alcohol, and then sexuality, it only affects him or her as an individual. No, it also affects the family in which he or she comes from, the community or society in which he or she lives, and then the nation at large. So the effect or such problems tends to affect a whole or larger number of personalities in the country. Some of the behaviors associated with adolescents, some of the behaviors that are portrayed or inculcated by adolescents when they reach their time, and which tends to affect them, the individuals, include: 1. Engaging in sexual activities. Yes, boys and girls tend to engage in sexual activities, and sometimes they tend to experiment something they are fed about, sexual activity, which probably may land them in so many troubles, which some includes HIV and AIDS and other deadly diseases, which is very bad and not encouraging. They also, as teenagers, become pregnant and then mothers, and this is for the adolescent girl. Because of engagement in sexual activities, they tend to be pregnant and then become mothers at a very tender age or at an early stage, which of course is not helping. And this, when practiced or when it comes into place, it makes them it makes them drop out of school or make them become school dropouts. Third one, or the third point I'll also talk about, is the drug use and abuse. Drug use and abuse. Because they are highly influenced by their peers, they tend to stick to drugs and then its usage. We have heard about so many drugs that are not well with the body. They tend to have access to them because they are adventurous under the previous lesson we talked about. 4. Streetism and poverty. Yes, because they are highly adventurous and the rest, they tend to leave their homes and then live with friends out there to partake in all sorts or indulge in all sorts of behaviors, and then at the end also makes them very poor. It makes them very poor. And then the fifth one I also talk about is negative peer pressure, which leads to criminal activities. negative peer pressure. The friends that they choose or they work with tends to affect them negatively, and then also tends to introduce a lot of social vices to them, which of course may land them into a lot of troubles, and then also make them criminals such as armed robbers, and then prostitutes in the case of the girls. The girls may indulge in prostitution, the boys may also involve themselves in armed robbery and the rest, and all these things are criminal activities, the fraud and the rest, which are not acceptable by the society. So in conclusion, I would say that since the problems of adolescence do not only affect the individual but also the society and the nation, we then have to manage the challenges adolescents face. So in our next lesson, we will talk about ways by which these problems that have been listed on the board will be addressed, and it will going to be how to manage the problems of adolescents. Thank you for being with me for today's lesson, and I hope to see you again in the next lesson. Thank you very much.